Good morning. It is with great pleasure to welcome you at the third invited talk session of the Jean Monnet Chair in Risk and Crisis Communication in the EU. Today, we have the honor and privilege to discuss with Antony Smith about risk communication. Antony Smith is a social scientist in risk communication. He works in the Department of Partnership and Cooperation at the European Food Safety Authority. After joining the EU agency in 2010, he has studied political science, economics, and anthropology, and has over 20 years of experience as a professional communicator in the public, private, and non-profit sectors. He has an eclectic track record of communications management and operational content production involving print and online media, multilingual news copy and public information, audiovisual formats, web and social media channels on topics ranging from sports, leisure, and finance to policy analysis, scientific food safety risk assessment, and communication methodologies. His current role at EFSA is risk communication scientist, in which he uses social research insights to develop communication approaches and to contribute to strategic communication planning and operations. Mr. Smith's research and contributions at EFSA outputs deals with topics on food safety risk communication, communication of scientific uncertainty, and risk-benefit communication. Throughout history, the human society has been deeply engaged in discussions to try to understand, interpret, mitigate, and manage risks. Risks can be found in all aspects of everyday life. In a risk society, everyone involved has a role to play in the management of risk, to mitigate and adapt to various risks. A critical part of risk management is risk communication. Risk communication refers to the entire communication framework that engages the authorities, policymakers, implementers, scientists, media, and general people in the process of knowledge sharing. Risk communication improves public risk awareness and empowers relevant publics by helping them to adopt protective behaviors that can mitigate the severe outcomes in the event of a risk event. Given the importance of risk communication in our risk society, this lecture will help us better understand the practices used and the challenges faced by communicators and related authorities when communicating risk-related information. More specifically, Mr. Smith will inform us on the issues such as current trends in risk communication, difficulties in theoretical approaches to risk communication, elements of accurate, consistent, and credible messages, effective risk communication practices and channels, the role of social media in communicating risk-related information, importance of citizens' engagement and participation in risk communication, challenges faced by risk communicators, and the role of EFSA in communicated food-related risks. Mr. Smith will help us delve inside the practice of risk communication. Mr. Smith, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amelia. I'm a bit flattered by that introduction, I think, but anyway, I'm very pleased to be here with you. I hope I can pass on some of the experience I've had from working at EFSA for the last 12 years, as was mentioned, in various roles. So this role I have now of risk communication scientist is, well, I've kind of evolved into this from being mainly a content producer. So I before I was at EFSA, I worked as a journalist. So I very much come from the communication side of things, pure communications, not risk communications. So I've evolved into this role of risk communicator. And well, I've got a presentation for you to guide you through my talk, which I'll embellish with some of the experiences that I've had. I've got some examples to present to you. Just some background about EFSA, just to be sure that we're all on the same page, so you understand. Also, because I heard Amelia mention that an important part of risk management is risk communication, but EFSA is a risk assessor, not a risk manager. So our risk communication is a bit different to the risk communication done by risk managers. But anyway, we can discuss the interface between the risk assessor and the risk manager and how we handle risk communication as we go along, or at the end in the discussion, if you prefer. Anyway, so maybe just to set the scene, I'll go with the presentation, and then we can have the discussion after that. I'm more than happy to answer questions if you have them while I'm presenting. Let me see, I'll just pull up the chat so that I can see them. If you have any questions for me, you know, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll see if hopefully I can answer them as I'm going along. Okay, so now I'm going to start with my presentation. And hopefully you can all see that. I can't see the chat anymore. So if there are questions, please, maybe somebody else who can see the chat can let me know. As I said, I'm more than happy to.
I will moderate the discussion later.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about risk communication in the EU food safety area, as was mentioned. Primarily, though, from EFSA's perspective. As I mentioned, EFSA is a risk assessor. EFSA does scientific risk assessment. So for the food and feed chain in the European Union. So, and it really is a broad remit. It goes all the way from the health of plants, the health of animals, even the environment where it's impacted by the food chain, right through the whole food production process onto the plate, even with, and we even have some nutrition role as well. We have a role where we provide scientific advice related to the nutritional component of food, and also an area called health claims. Anyway, we'll look at those a little later. So we're a European Union agency. We're an independent body. Our budget comes from the EU budget, but we operationally are independent, although of course we work closely with the European Commission, which is our kind of reference point in the institutions. DG Sante, so Health and Food Safety is the Directorate General in the Commission. That's our main point of reference within the institutions. So we've already heard a little bit about risk management and risk communication. I just thought it's good to recap, given that EFSA has the specific role of risk assessor. How does risk assessment fit into the risk analysis paradigm? So you've probably seen these types of images before. The risk assessment is the science-based part of the risk analysis process. So evaluating things from a science, using scientific evidence, scientific expertise. And this then is passed on to the risk managers who act upon the scientific inputs and other inputs that they deem to be necessary as well, economic, for example, social factors and others. Risk communication embraces all of that. I added this audience focus part because I think that's really important, that risk communication is really about addressing the needs of audiences. So, and although here it forms a third concentric circle, really, to me, it covers the whole process. So it's about, how we exchange the scientific advice and information. So getting the data as well to do the risk assessments, how then the risk managers implement measures that follow the risk management process. And all through that is the dialogue with the various interested parties, which are of course called stakeholders in the EU system and other systems. So that's just a recap of the risk analysis paradigm. And because it's important later when I talk to you about the types of communications that we do, because it's our role to do risk communication about risk assessment, not about risk management. So that does shape a little bit the type of communication we do as well. Yes, of course, that's from Codex Alimentarius. So just to recap then, so we provide the independent scientific advice for the risk managers. We also provide the risk communication, but the risk communication is about the scientific assessments. We can also provide public information as well about the assessments and the context as well. We have a really important role in promoting scientific cooperation as well. So that's especially with member state authorities. EFSA acts as a hub to generate data, standardize the way data is used in the European Union in the food safety area, and also to share expertise as well. Most of our experts, of course, come from across the whole EU. So we act as a hub to bring those experts together and kind of foster this interdisciplinary context of doing scientific risk assessment. Just it's kind of worth underlining what we don't do. So we don't develop the policies on food safety. We don't develop the regulation. We don't provide dietary recommendations either. Bodies like the WHO do that, and member state public health authorities. So we don't adopt regulations or authorize new products. And we don't communicate the risk management measures or the non-scientific basis for decisions. We just focus on scientific stuff. So, of course, there's a fine line there. You can't just talk about some things without including a broader context, and that's where your communication skills come into it, but also having a good kind of dialogue with risk managers, so that you ensure that the messages you provide are not left hanging. You don't leave your reader or the user of your video or whatever hanging in nothing, waiting for the next step in the process. So just we celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. So EFSA's been around for 20 years now. Our staff has grown a lot since 2019 because of something called the Transparency Regulation. I'm not sure if you heard of that, but it was a new regulation which increased the, let's say, the type of work that we needed to do in relation to making the scientific information we use in the risk assessments more public, more accessible. So we've had to get more staff on board for that. There's also very important elements in the transparency regulation dealing with risk communication as well. So I'm not going to go into that in this presentation, but essentially it aims to improve the cooperation between all the different actors. So the risk assessors, the risk managers at both EU level and at national level. That's an ongoing thing, though. There's something called the General Plan for Risk Communication, which is developing, albeit slowly, in the background. We hope one day that will. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about that later anyway, but I won't dwell on it right now. So we have lots of meetings, as you can see. Maybe more importantly, we've produced over 9,000 scientific outputs since 2003. Most of these are scientific opinions of our expert panels, but there's also scientific reports, what are called conclusions on peer reviews, which are about active substances that are used in pesticides. So a big chunk of that 9,000 is actually a pesticide related. So if you divide that up, it works out around 450 per year to 500. So as you can imagine, there's many things that EFSA does and many things that we could communicate about, but of course we need to narrow down and focus on the things that we really need to communicate about. And I'll explain to you a little bit how we do that as we go along. So risk communication, at least from the EFSA point of view, that's what we'll just focus on for a second now. So our risk communication is trying to bridge the gap between science and society. So yes, it's science communication, but it has that extra element of trying to take into account risk perceptions. Risk is a concept which factors in our daily work all the time. There are various approaches to how you best do risk communication. I know that you're all you've been studying these models and things already, so I'm not going to look at those types of things here, but what I'm just is kind of trying to encapsulate how we operate, because on an operational level you need to do practical things, also because most of the people who work in the team, they're not communication science academics. They don't come, they've studied maybe politics or maybe media studies. So the theory about risk communication is a bit far removed from the day-to-day work of most of the communicators at EFSA. That's why it's people like me who try and bring the sides together, both the operational with the more theoretical side of things. So definitely science and society, how can we get society to understand what we do and kind of take it into account when they think about what the decisions that are taken on their behalf or the decisions that they make on a daily basis. So understand how aware they are of the risks of the different types of issues in food safety. We need to understand, as I mentioned before, perceptions as well. Perceptions have a massive influence on the communication, because sometimes there's just no point trying to say one thing if you know that your audience is already convinced of another. So that does play a role. Obviously, as a public body, you still have to get your message out, and even if there are obstacles to that, then you still have to try, and you have to find new ways to do that. And I guess that's what we've been doing over the last few years while I've been at EFSA anyway. So in order to bridge that gap, to take account of all those awareness, understanding, perceptions, you need to tailor the information. So get the information right, not pitch it too high, don't pitch it too low, at the right time, using the right tools and channels. And also, what we at least try to do is show our audiences that science is sexy, so make it compelling. There's an argument for trying to get people to believe in science again. There's been a bit of a drop in faith in science, although from our social research we see that scientists are still the most trusted source of information on food safety. So maybe some of it's a bit of a media hype as well. Who do we communicate to? Well, this is a hugely complex question in a European Union of 450 million people. So there are so many countries, cultures, languages. It's incredibly hard to try and take into account all of those different aspects. And within those cultures and countries, there are, different levels of education, different, ways of finding information. So it's a very complex picture. This is a very crude audience segmentation that we developed around 2015 when we revamped our website. And we've kind of used it since then. It's as I said, a bit crude, a bit simple, but it's actually quite effective. So we've had these 3 levels. It's more of a kind of I'm trying to remember the term. It's a knowledge deficit kind of model. So you're just basing it on lots of assumptions about people's prior knowledge, scientific, technical literacy, this kind of thing. So, but actually it's quite effective. We've since developed more sophisticated audience segmentation strategies where we look more at trust in sources of information. We look at awareness, understanding, and the types of tools and channels that people use as well. So we're doing things differently, but I just thought I'd show this is just to give you a basic idea about the types of audiences we have. And although we want to, be as open to the general public as possible, the reality is that most people probably get their food safety news through national channels. Some might come to the EFSA website or the Commission website, but probably most people get that through the national newspapers, the national TV stations. TV is still the main source of information on food safety according to the Eurobarometer. So that's across the whole EU. And all age levels as well, even for younger age groups as well. There are a few exceptions here and there, but basically TV is still the dominant channel. So as you can see there, we've got these 3 levels of audience that we work with. I won't list them all, but they speak for themselves, I think. So this entry informed technical, it is a knowledge deficit model, but it as I said, it's worked quite effectively for us. Now what we do is we kind of use this and then do a second segmentation within that, or we do this other segmentation, as I said, based on awareness, perceptions, and trust. So, and then you can further refine it with your social demographic information as well. So age, gender, that's something we're using more for campaigns that we've been doing in recent years. Okay, so that's the audience. So why, how do we decide what to communicate about? Well, we have, you know, as an organization, we have a corporate strategy. So if we, for example, want to show that data use of artificial intelligence in systematic literature reviews is the way forward, then that might influence the choice of thing that we want to communicate on. The scientific calendar is, well, we get requests from the risk managers, mainly the European Commission, but also the European Parliament and the member states. We get requests to do the risk assessments. So the assessments come in, they have a time frame. In the kind of market authorizations area, those have very specific timeframes of, say, 6 months, 9 months. There can be stop the clock procedures as well, but basically they have a designated time frame. And then for some of the other more generic risk assessments, those can last usually about 18 months, but some of them can go on for 4 or 5 years, even longer in some cases. So, so basically, as the risk assessments evolve, that also influences what we communicate on at any given time, of course. So which topics would we focus on? Well, if there are public health concerns about, you know, something, a substance, or you know, maybe a pollutant that's found in the food chain, then of course, if our scientists conclude that there are health concerns, then that usually is a prime motivator. But there can be other reasons as well. If it's a topic which is in the let's say in the public eye, like bee health. So we do a lot of work on bee health because there's a lot of concern about bee colony disorder and decline of bees. So we do quite a lot of work there. Then obviously if there's a crisis, luckily at my time in EFSA, there's only been a few. The biggest one I experienced was in 2011 was the E. coli outbreak in Germany and France, where about 200 people unfortunately died from E. coli poisoning, a pretty horrible strain of E. coli. Since then, we've had a few lesser crisis type situations, but nothing as quite as horrible as that one. But obviously that would be a big factor. And crisis communication, from what I understand, you've looked at a bit already. So I'm not going to go into that too much, but just to say, obviously that's a major trigger if there is a crisis, and it can be a reputational crisis as well. I'm not just confining it to a food safety crisis. So it could be maybe there's you know, allegations of conflicts of interest or something like that. So these things do happen, and so we consider that also maybe not a crisis, but an emergency situation or something like that. Then the political and institutional context is really important. Some of you might have heard of the Green Deal. It's a policy of the current Commission of von der Leyen. And as part of that, there's a EU farm to fork strategy, and within that, there's a big focus on reducing use of pesticides in food production. So that has a massive impact on our work, given we do such a lot of work on pesticides evaluation. And then the market interest as well, that obviously has an interest, has an impact. You might notice, you might be familiar with that product there on the slide. It's called Roundup. Roundup is a very widely used herbicide, and it contains an active substance called glyphosate. And glyphosate has been at the center of a kind of big controversy over recent years about how we assess pesticides and how they're regulated and all the rest of it. So, and that of course means if there's a lot of pressure on a point like that, then we need to do communication about it to explain our role, the science that we do, and the roles of other organizations as well, because we don't work in a vacuum, we work together with others. So these are some of the factors that influence what we do. I mentioned before that we have this role, the very broad remit from farm to fork, as you can see there. The circles in the middle are the kind of macro areas, if you like, the scientific areas: pesticides, plant health, the GMOs, animal feed. We do a lot on animal health and welfare. That's a huge part of our work, especially at the moment. So biological hazards, chemical contaminants, food packaging, and there's a few of the more controversial or maybe better known topics mentioned. Bisphenol A is a chemical used in the production of plastics that are used for food packaging. Quite a controversial one. We're just finalizing opinion on that. So as you can see, it's a very broad area, and that's why we need a lot of different types of scientific expertise at EFSA. That makes it even harder for us communicators to get in the minds of the microbiologists and the toxicologists and the chemists and the plant pathologists and try and understand what on earth they're talking about. You know, it's a hugely challenging thing to try and do that, but we specialize a bit. Actually now we grew a little over recent years, and there's about 8-9 people now focusing on the different scientific areas. I mean communicators, so about 8-9 communicators. So we specialize a bit, so we understand a bit better. Well, we understand much better what the scientists' work involves, so then we can translate that into messages and information that broader audiences can understand. So those are the areas. We, as an organization, we have values that we try to embed in our work as well. So we might have secondary messages about our independence, about the strength of our science, about how open we are. Cooperation is a big thing of our current executive director, Bernard Earle. He's pushed the cooperation agenda a lot with other EU agencies and also with member states. So those are things that we try to keep as, secondary messages within the content that we develop as well, where we might be, the main focus would be obviously the food safety element. Okay, this is actually a slide that I use for some internal training with new arrivals, just to explain to them how we understand the scientific work and where we get the information from. So I won't try and explain it all, but maybe just that middle column is interesting, because of course when we the key thing we really need to get to grips with is understanding the risks. So who is affected, the population groups, or are they animals? What are the health risks that are faced? How severe are they? What specific health risks are they? And what kind of consequences do they have for people's lives? Which population is at risk? So is it the general population? Is it infants? Is it pregnant women? Those tend to be vulnerable groups. And then, of course, which foods, which are the foods where people are mainly consuming that might be linked to exposure to risk. So those are really important points. We also need to think about, there's this box down at the bottom, multipliers. So, as I mentioned before, maybe not everybody will come to the EFSA website to read about our work. So we need to consider what the media, what kind of information the media need, what will sell a story to them. And I'll look in a second about the pros and cons of the different channels that we use. So how you frame the message is important, because you need to trigger people, those multipliers, to further disseminate your information. A classic, just in the final 2 boxes on the right, next step. So what's going to happen after the risk assessment is done? What will the risk managers do? So that's where I mentioned before, we really need to have a good dialogue with the Commission usually, but also sometimes with the member states if they've requested an output. So we need to liaise with them, maybe get a quote. That's an ideal situation where we get a quote from them saying that this work will be used to do X, Y, and Z. So that's, it gives the reader, it helps complete the story for the reader so they know that something is going to be done about it, because the last thing we want is people to be alarmed, overly alarmed about something that we need to communicate. And then, of course, we need to provide more details depending on the target audience as well. So it depends on the type of content that you produce. So, and verify all the facts. So just a quick recap on the way the scientists produce the outputs. So very structured, very, let's say, technical, with maybe not concise language, abstract results. The conclusions come right at the end. So this is quite a complex way of providing information. But from a scientific point of view, that's the standard way it's done, so that other scientists can find the information in the right way. Of course, we as communicators do it the other way around. This is called the inverted pyramid. You may be familiar with this already. You get your most important information comes first in the headline, in the first paragraph, then some supporting points come after that. And then, of course, the details. At least this is the classic structure for news, at least. There's other types of communications that we do where it might not follow exactly this kind of frame. It might come more in the middle or even more at the end if there's a call to action. So especially in things like videos, short videos, where you want a call to action, then that could be a slightly different model. For how you do how you organize your content. Okay, so I was told by the professor that you'd be interested in the tools and channels that we use and what works for which audiences, this kind of thing. So I'm just going to quickly go through what we use at EFSA and then follow that with some examples showing you what we did on the different topics, and I'll give you some a bit of background on the impact that those communications had. So just to go quickly through the tools and channels, here's an overview. So it's a fairly standard suite of website, multimedia. We also have a scientific journal that tailors to that technical audience that I mentioned before. They get their information there. But more and more we use social media. That's become really, in fact, internally we have a kind of social media first policy where we want to try to use social media as the primary, almost as the primary channel for a lot of the work that we do. But of course, the website is still important. The journalists are still important. You need to work with journalists. Actually, they're not mentioned here, but well, it says news. Scientific outreach, of course, you still, EFSA doesn't, as I said, we don't just communicate with the general public or the stakeholders. We also have this community of scientists, so a technical audience that we also interact with. So as well as the channels that we use, like our scientific journal, we also have a lot of interaction with them in meetings, in conferences. We had a big conference last summer in Brussels, which went really well. We organized it with other EU agencies. We have lots of webinars and things that we now do online. And some of those, many of them are, very technical oriented. Also in our panel meetings, we have each of our scientific panels has an open plenary meeting once a year where you can register as an observer and listen to their discussions and ask some questions. So if anybody's interested in doing that, I would have a look at the EFSA website. I think it's in the Engage section of the EFSA website. and you can find out when those open plenaries are. It's really interesting. It is quite technical language, but they usually, for the open sessions, they try to, select topics which are a bit more accessible for the observers as well. But many of the observers obviously are the stakeholders. They attend because they've got an interest in it, industry or NGOs mainly. So, but those are really interesting meetings. I go to the plenary meetings as much as I can. Sometimes it's utterly bewildering what they're talking about, but it is quite fascinating. Okay, so just to quickly run through the suite of tools and channels that we have. Obviously, we've got the website. We now have a multilingual website in all EU languages, all 24 EU languages. Not all the sections of the website, but most of them. It's done by by machine translation. So we initially used in-house translators when we had just 4 languages. We had English, French, Italian, and German. But slowly we're moving, as the technologies improve, we moved now to machine translation. So we've got that now for our website. There's the EFSA journal on the right. So this obviously is aimed at the scientific community. It's published on a fully professional scientific publishing platform, Wiley Online. You may have heard of Wiley Online. It's a big scientific publisher along the same lines as Elsevier and others. So it's a professional. It's done in a very professional way, and we're very proud of the EFSA journal now. It's evolved from, it used to just be a section of our website about 10 years ago. Now it's this really kind of quite incredible online scientific journal. So we're really proud of that. So website pros and cons, and I include the journal in that as well. Obviously, you can you've got a broad reach. You can cover all the topics. Updating things is easy. You can link to all kinds of additional material, but of course the engagement is very limited. You can't really target individual users or groups of users. Searchability sometimes is limited. I know I'm not the only one at EFSA who prefers to use Google to find things on the EFSA website. So our search tool, nobody can compete with the Google search tool, so people still use that. And yeah, there's information overload. There's so much information there, sometimes you don't know where to look. And the architecture is always a challenge. How do you organize your information on a website in a way that people can find it effectively? So that's everybody has different views, and users do it in different ways. There's no one solution that fits all. One-fits-all solution. Okay, the news is in the media is still a critically important channel. We have a big focus on journalists, where we establish, individual relationships with journalists to get to know them, understand what motivates them, what kinds of stories they're interested in, and that covers both kind of specialized media, mainly based in Brussels, for example, like Politico or Euractiv. These are Brussels-based outlets. The Parliament, that's a magazine run from the European Parliament. But we also focus just as importantly on the news wires. So there you see Answer, but Reuters. We have, we get lots of things published through Reuters, which then get syndicalized all over the world. I'll show you some examples in a while. So working with the media is really essential, because it helps you get your message out. So, and what are the pros and cons for using the media? Well, it's quick. So if something, you need a quick, urgent action, then, most journalists, they're looking for tomorrow's news story. So it's spontaneous. If there are public health concerns, then the media will pick up on that. Bad news sells. Sensitive topics work as well. It's obviously high impact because it has a national, I mean, obviously it depends on, the sector specific media, so that has a high impact if you want to target those types of audiences. Like, for example, we have the feed additive, there are 2 feed additive papers based in France or in Brussels, Belgium, I can't remember, but they obviously, the whole industry reads those two news channels. So if we have something we want to get out, then we work with them to try and get a piece published, and that reaches the audience that we want. So it just goes to show you that, you know, even something that can be seen as quite a niche audience, it can be really important when you need to have you know, reach out to a very specific kind of audience as well. And a really important point is it's most media is national media, as I said before. So you are having an impact in a national context if you get your stories published in Le Monde or in Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. What are the cons? Well, as I said before, journalists like bad news. So if something is a low risk, then they're not really interested. But it might be an important message we want to get out, but journalists aren't really bothered by it. They're not really interested in the more corporate organizational things or the processes. So we sometimes think our new methodology on assessing chemical mixtures is absolutely fantastic and everybody should be excited about it, but of course the journalists are not. And well, fake news is a problem, not so much in you know, in the more established news outlets, but more in the way the news is shared and some of these more dubious sources as well. So that's an issue that overlaps with social media as well, of course. Multimedia. So we produce a lot of multimedia products, infographics. You see there's a few examples, meat safety in Europe, risk assessment versus risk management. So try to explain what we do. These are great to explain processes, to show data. We have interactive tools where you can get access to data and play with it. There's the one in the background there is the it's antimicrobial resistance data visualization tool. So you can look at the levels of resistance in different countries and compare them for the different types of antimicrobials, the medicines, the antibiotics. The DRV Finder is a really interesting online database aimed at nutritionists and dietitians and decision makers. And basically at your fingertips, you've got all the, what we call the dietary reference values. So that's the inadequate intakes, the adequate intakes, and the what are called the top tolerable upper intake levels for the nutrients, the micronutrients and macronutrients. And before that information was dispersed all over the EFSA website in various publications, and we worked together with the scientists to do a database of it, and that is a single tool. And you know, the professionals who use it say it's absolutely brilliant, so they're very happy with it. Videos, we do a lot of videos. The one you see there is one of our scientists, Krista Hogstrand from King's College in London. He's a Swedish toxicologist, and there's a colleague of mine, Reinhilde Skernigans. So Krista's video was about alternatives to animal testing. Reinhilde's was about nanotechnology. Those are two of the most viewed on our YouTube channel. We've done a series called Understanding Science, and so we use these videos to explain a bit the scientific work and get people both to try and, as remember I said before right at the beginning, to show the kind of compelling side of science. So by doing these compelling videos, which with nice interactive graphics, you kind of get the attention of the viewer, and then try and get them to find out more about the type of work that we do beyond these. So this is what we use those for primarily. Multimedia pros and cons. So visually engaging, you can make complex things simple, present data, explain processes, as I mentioned. But of course, they cost a lot. Okay, some infographics now you can do quite cheaply. Those videos, those are really, really expensive and take a long time in development. You have to do a storyboard, develop a script, choreograph everything, then do the graphics after you do the filming. So there's a huge bit of work involved in those. And yeah, multilingualism is not the easiest as well, because you tend to have to use subtitles on things, or do multiple versions of the same product, and well, we get around that actually, or we found a good solution to that, which is to work with the member states. So when the member states want a product in a specific language, in their language, then they help us provide the translations, and then we do the desktop publishing graphic design work, and we provide a new language version if they need it for their own communication. So that's a way, one of the solutions to that. Social media, so we're particularly active on Twitter while it's still around. Let's see what happens with Twitter. We have, yeah, you can see 45,000 followers there now. We really got active on Twitter about 10 years ago, so we've been building up there. Now we use it a lot for campaigns, but also just for our daily news items and updates about job vacancies, procurement, as you can see there, but also the scientific work as well, and the corporate activities, and interinstitutional types of activities as well. The middle screenshot that you can see is LinkedIn. So there we have 160,000 followers, so really big following on LinkedIn, and that we use also to provide info on some of those other things, but also more with the focus on the professional side of it. So it's with the job vacancies, but actually it's underused. Given we have such a following there, I think we should make more use of it. On the right, there is actually an Instagram channel that we were on Instagram as EFSA, and then we decided to team up with what we call our sister EU agencies. That's the Disease Prevention Agency, the Environment Agency, the Chemicals Agency, and the Medicines Agency. We all come under the umbrella of the Environment Agencies in the EU. So we teamed up, and we have a single channel now. We pooled all our resources, and we schedule, we kind of plan everything together, and it's doing quite well. That was launched at the beginning of last year, and I think it's as you can see, 8,000 followers. So it's done quite well in the first year. Social media, so it's what are the pros and cons? So it's quick again, very quick, almost too quick sometimes. Because you need to be responsive. That's more on the con side. You can target your users much better. If you have followers, then and they have profiles, then you can target them in much more sophisticated ways than you can with a website, for example. Lead to behavioral change. That's not really EFSA's main goal. But it could be in a crisis situation, or in a situation where we want users to, or we've worked together with risk managers to try and influence behavior as well.
Στέφαν, είσαι εκεί? Στέφανε. Βγήκε ο μιλητής.
Υπάρχει πρόβλημα στη σύνδεση, μάλλον. Ένα λεπτό.
Στη δική μας τη σύνδεση ή ο μιλητής είχε πρόβλημα?
Ο μιλητή είναι.
Θα περιμένουμε μέχρι να ξανασυνδεθεί. Και αν θέλετε να γράψετε τις ερωτήσεις σας στο chat, προετοιμαστείτε λίγο για τις ερωτήσεις. Να έχουμε και ερωτήσεις. Ας προετοιμαστούμε με ερωτήσεις στα αγγλικά. Oh, yes. I think we had a problem with the connection. We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, now we can hear you.
Okay, I apologize. My computer crashed. I just sent you a message, Amelia, but you know, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
And I was just getting to the kind of juicy bit as well with the examples. So shall we crack back on then?
Again, let's share the screen again.
Yes. Okay. So we were on social media. We talked about the pros. On the cons side of things, obviously, won't go into a huge amount about it here, but social media, you may have heard of a phenomenon called echo chambers, whereby users with similar kind of interests, values, beliefs tend to start living in a kind of closed environment and not listening to the opinions of people that hold different opinions and beliefs, etc. So when you're dealing with sensitive subjects pesticides or GMOs, you know, you might find yourself drawn into one of these echo chambers, and it's very difficult to combat, you know, certain beliefs that are already held by people. So this is one of the cons, if you like, that you might be sucked into something that you find difficulty in you know, getting your arguments across in a rational way. Having said that, I don't think that's ever happened to us at EFSA. We haven't had any of that kind of you know, really. We've had criticism about glyphosate, the pesticide active substance I mentioned, but it's fairly easy to deal with. We obviously answer the comments that we get, and we try to explain the work that we do and provide any users who leave comments, you know, with possibilities of getting more information about it as well. So as I said, for us, so far at least, we haven't had any a major social media crisis. So I mentioned before that it's very obviously social media is very, very quick, so you need to be very responsive, and that means you need resources, you need people who are constantly monitoring your social media channels. In fact, one reason we've not gone active on Facebook is because of the resources that it would involve, just in terms of monitoring and everything, and just because of the way Facebook works, we decided at an organizational level that it wasn't a type of channel that worked best for the type of communication that EFSA does. Yeah, those, as I mentioned, those sensitive topics, you can look like you're on the defensive, and that, you know, puts you in a corner. And again, fake news on social media is a huge challenge. In the food safety area, I would say on the whole, it's not a huge issue, not like in other areas like with the vaccines, etc. But we have had instances of fake news where, you know, things have been said about pesticides and EFSA's role in it. But usually it's been fairly easy to deal with that. Usually working with member states and other organizations involved in those discussions as well, those online discussions. Okay, so those are a bit the tools and channels that we use. Of course, there's all those others I mentioned, like the meetings and all the rest of it, the conferences, but I won't go into everything. I think it's probably too much to try and do. What I will mention, though, is that we're focusing more on campaigns more and more in our work. I'm going to show you a couple of examples, and the interesting thing about the campaigns is that really they're holistic. They're looking at using all the different or many of the different tools and channels in unison, and in particular using them together with member states. So I'll show you a couple of examples of that as we in a few minutes. But first we'll look at some more of the more classic examples of communications that we would do. Food additives. So food additives is, we know from Eurobarometer that consumers have a lot of concerns about food additives. Obviously, there's the whole thing about e-numbers and things being stuck in your food that aren't natural, or at least that's what people think. So we evaluate all the new food additives, but since 2009, we also have been re-evaluating food additives that are already on the market. We do actually a lot of re-evaluations, not just food additives, but also pesticides, feed additives. But anyway, there's a big program of food additive re-evaluations that's been going on for years. Titanium dioxide is it's actually used as a food color, primarily as a food color. Now, we re-evaluated this in 2016 and we couldn't do a fully conclusive opinion because of uncertainties about possible effects. After that, the French Food Safety Agency, ANSES, issued a couple of reports indicating that they felt there wasn't sufficient data to be conclusive that this food additive was safe. So it's banned in France in 2020. Member states can do that, but of course it does introduce problems because the single market won't function if one member state bans a product that's you know, legal in the whole union. So it does introduce issues, but eventually we re-examined this issue, and we decided that we could no longer conclude that it was safe because of the potential genotoxicity. So the potential of the substance to affect to cause gene mutation in some cells. So just to mention that it's a very, very widely used food additive. It mainly gives a white color or a glossy color to food products. It's also used in toothpaste. So that white glossy toothpaste, it could be from titanium dioxide. Some still, many still use it. I remember after the opinion came out, checking mine, and mine had titanium dioxide in it. So there'll be basically as a response to our conclusion in 2021, the Commission and the member states decided to ban this food color. It's phased, it'll be phased out from use in the market. So I think it's still legally used on the market, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I can't remember the exact dates now. But it's a product with very widely used in products that people use in their everyday life. As I said, all kinds of different food products and toothpaste and paint as well. So it's not just used in food, it also has non-food uses. So this has a massive market impact and a big impact on consumers as well. You know, it sounds very alarming. We can't say safe anymore, but you're all eating it. You're all still eating it. So, or you're consuming it in your food products. So how do we get around that? Well, first and foremost, we needed to be clear that we didn't think it was safe anymore. So that was the focus that we took in our news story, and that news story was picked up and very much spread across news media all over Europe and beyond, actually, because of course it's used very widely in other parts of the world as well. At the same time, we wanted to explain why we thought it wasn't safe. So we used one of our videos on explaining what genotoxicity is. So yes, genotoxicity is quite, it's an important possible health concern. If something is potentially genotoxic, though, it doesn't mean that suddenly you're all going to drop dead from cancer. That's not how it works. It's over a lifetime. So, if you phase out something that's potentially genotoxic now, then later in life, you should be absolutely fine. So we had an FAQ about that as well. And importantly, we worked really closely with the member states on this one. So we really coordinated all the key messages with them, the timing. They all had the materials in advance, and they all came out with the same story as EFSA, with their, their national perspective, obviously. But it was really important for us to work closely with them on something like this that has a big impact across, on everyday lives. And so even though it's quite an alarming story, I think the way we handled it together with the member states, and also the fact that the risk managers, the Commission, wanted to act upon it immediately as well, this made the message easier for people to take, so they could take on board this message that it's not safe, but you're not at immediate risk. So it's being phased out, which means you'll be protected. So in this case, as I said, we concentrated more on traditional news, FAQ, and we happen to have this video already that we made about genotoxicity. The next example is about in the nutrition area. I mentioned before that we do these dietary reference values. One of these is what's called the tolerable upper intake level. So if you have, nutrients are a specific case because too little or too much of some nutrients can be bad for you, but you need them in your diet. They're essential to your organism's well-being and functioning. And even sugars although there's an argument that you could get your energy from other sources as well. Sugars are good for your brain as well, for the functioning of your brain. So, and for the blood. So there are some, nutritional benefits of sugar intake. So that's why sugars are treated as nutrients within the regulatory context. So we were asked to set what's the threshold, the tolerable upper intake by the 4 Nordic countries in 2017. So I think what's interesting is that we had a 2-phase communication process here. We had a draft opinion in 2021 and then the final opinion at the beginning of 2022. This draft opinion came out as part of a public consultation, and we do that in many of the outputs now. This one was particularly important because in the nutrition area there's lots of different interests involved. EFSA doesn't provide dietary advice to citizens. EFSA doesn't decide what goes on nutrition labels or anything like that. This is all done mainly at the member state level. What EFSA does is provide scientific inputs to help public health authorities develop those dietary guidelines. So we say how much is adequate an intake, and then at member state level you can adjust that based on the types of dietary patterns that people have in different countries and different contexts. There's a lot of diversity across Europe, as we mentioned earlier. So things like dietary guidelines really vary from one country to another. But also the World Health Organization has a big role here as well. They are involved in setting the dietary recommendations. So it was really important for us to explain exactly what our role was, how we fit into that picture. And so we had a really active engagement process during that public consultation phase. But we knew also that sugars is a topic that interests a lot of people. It's linked to a lot of different health problems, obesity, type 2 diabetes. So when we, in both these phases, we use some products to try and get across those key issues, what our role is and how we fit into the picture, and then what the different types of sugars are that we're looking at, and what those health problems might be. By the way, in the end, we concluded that we couldn't set a tolerable upper intake level because there's no level of sugars which is basically safe, because it makes your teeth rot. Sugars make your teeth rot and give you cavities. So from a scientific point of view, you can't say that a certain amount of sugars in your diet per day is safe, because there'll always be something that sugars do to your health, and dental caries is the main, or at least it's the one that we couldn't exclude at all. So but what we could do was explain to people what those different types of sugars were, and if by limiting certain types of sugars in your diet you could reduce the risk to other health problems like these ones here. Unfortunately, I'm sorry about this, the quality is not great, I don't know why. But what in this little table at the end here, we show that certain types of sugars, so added and free sugars, fructose, sugar sweetened beverages. So we showed that there's strong evidence linking intake of those sugars with certain types of diseases, and they vary. So fructose is mainly linked to cardiovascular diseases, whereas fruit juices was obesity and type 2 diabetes, for example. So as you can see, there's information in there about the different health problems. Also the sources, the other, just above that, there's a graphic with adults and children on, and it tells you the main sources of sugars in the diet as well. Sorry about the quality of that, I hadn't realized. But this on the first page, actually, the breakdown of the sugars, this I would say this is one of the few things that we've produced that went viral. It really did go viral, this graphic. when we published it at the beginning of 2022. It was all over in Spain in particular. It went absolutely viral in Spain, so it was big coverage there. Okay, novel foods. Novel foods are foods which were not significantly used on the market prior to 1997. That's just a regulatory definition. We are involved in the safety evaluation. It covers all kinds of different things. Herbal things, different seeds like chia seeds, quinoa, for example. So some things that maybe were not very common in the diet 10, 15, 20 years ago, now quite common, and they are marketed as novel foods, at least from a regulatory standpoint. So there was a growing, let's say, movement from manufacturers from around 10 years ago, and this was identified as an emerging issue at EFSA, was insects, so insects as food or feed. So we did a scientific opinion in 2015, just to kind of explain how we would go about assessing risks from insects as food. So when we say insects as food, it's also as food ingredients, so it could be like powder, flour made from insects that you use in baking or whatever. So yeah, maybe it doesn't sound very nice. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that side of things. We can talk about it later if you want. But anyway, we did say that there's a special focus on the allergenicity, so the potential for allergic reactions because insects are rich in protein. Not all of them, not always. But yeah, there is they're alternative source of protein to, for example, animal proteins. So we published our first opinion on this at the beginning of 2022. Dry mealworms. That's a picture of them up there. Lovely looking things. I've never tried one. I've no idea what they taste like, but by all accounts, they taste okay. At least they're very commonly eaten in parts of Asia and in parts of Africa, so different types of insects are eaten there. And of course, they're a good source of protein. So, okay, and also there's a kind of sustainability context as well, which is to reduce the dependency on animal proteins and of course the environmental impact of rearing huge numbers of animals and the impact it has on resources, on the climate as well. So there are arguments about, alternative sources of protein, and insects is one of them. So what did we do? Well, we covered this in we did a news piece on this. We didn't focus on the individual product because we don't do that when we're looking at these market authorizations, because otherwise we might be seen to favoring, they might be, EFSA's favoring this product over another. So we focused on the safety aspects. So are they safe? But then we also included we included some quotes from social scientists, from an economist as well. There's a concept in risk perception, which is the yuck factor. It's a kind of it's a bias, isn't it? It's a cognitive bias where you immediately associate something with something horrible just from the way it looks. So that we talked about that in the news story that we did. I wrote that one, actually. It was really good fun to write it. And then we also mentioned the sustainability elements as well. And this thing just went absolutely crazy. So we had hundreds and hundreds of news pieces covering this story all over the world: Korea, South America, North America, Asia, Russia, wherever. This story got covered pretty much everywhere. What we tried to do was bang on and on and on the message that we're not advocating that people eat insects. What we're just saying is that they're safe if you want to try them, and these other elements that go together with consuming new foods that you're not used to. You might probably 20, 25 years ago, most people in Europe thought the idea of eating raw fish, like, you eating sushi, as being pretty awful. But now, of course, it's very, very common. So So with time, things can change. But anyway, as I said, we're not advocating one thing or the other. So this is the first of two campaigns that I wanted to mention to you. African swine fever is a disease which is lethal for pigs. It kills pigs. Luckily, it's not passed on to humans, so we're not at risk. When we see a pig with African swine fever, it's not a risk for humans. But of course, it wipes out entire herds of, well, you don't say herd, what do you say? Anyway, you know, pig farms have had to cull their entire pig stock because of African swine fever infection. So it has a massive social and economic impact in affected areas. We did a risk assessment in 2019 where we tried to, because the first cases had started to be seen in Europe, mainly southeastern Europe, so the Balkan countries. So also, I think parts of Greece. Greece was at risk of the spread of the disease. It was mainly in kind of former Yugoslav countries, Croatia, Serbia. So we together with the Commission as well, actually, and the member states, we ran, we just last year finished the third year of this seasonal campaign where we targeted key, you know, audiences, the farmers, of course, to recognize if their stock have got the disease, but also hunters in case they see them in wild pigs, boar, and veterinarians, of course, as well. Most would probably be familiar with it, but anyway, just to ensure that they have all the information that they need. I think we also targeted, in the first year, we also targeted holiday makers who, you know, hikers and stuff like that. So people who might be out hiking and see wild boar who were covered in sores or something like that to report this type of thing. So it was a campaign to raise awareness about the disease and also the fact that the disease has, you know, if it spreads, it has massive implications. So actually in 2019 we did this, you see this animation on the left. Actually after that nanotechnology video that I showed you a screenshot of earlier, this is one of our most viewed multimedia products. I think something like 300,000 views it's had. That was the last time I looked. So it was really the day in the life of a farmer who spots, you know, African swine fever among his pigs and kind of what he should do about it. So that was a really effective tool. We then followed that up with the campaign in 2020, 2021 and 2022. As you can see there, the post, these are a series of posters that we developed. It's pretty, you know, it's pretty impactful, isn't it? It's a horrible picture of this poor pig who's dead from this horrible disease. But, you know, this really is impactful and it immediately grabs your attention. And these have been placed in strategic locations, you know, farmers markets and different areas where you might get those target audiences congregating or individually. There's a toolkit that we produced as well, together with member states. So it's available in the languages of all the affected countries and the at-risk countries. And by the way, it started in those Balkan countries, but then it grew, and most of the other Central and Eastern European countries were involved as well in the last year of that. Has it had an impact? Well, in some countries they've managed to stamp out the disease. I just read that Czech Republic was one country where they've managed to now stamp out the disease. They were also involved in the campaign. I'm sure the campaign isn't the only reason, but we could safely say that we contributed to that in some way. And of course, we've got lots and lots of figures about impact and all the rest of it. And overall, the response from the member states, from the chief veterinary offices in the member states as well, has been really, really positive. They felt that it really helped them, give them a focus who to focus on and how to do it, you know, have some materials to use as well. So this has been, I would say, a really successful campaign that we've done in the last few years. Okay, this is the last one. Sorry, I know it's taken a long time, but anyway, I hope you find it interesting. We actually did a kind of campaign focused on citizens in early 2019, just before the last European elections. We did a short campaign called EU and My Food, and it really gave us a taste. We wanted to do more of these types of things because we really tried to, you know, make food safety and the various issues that it's involved really relevant for the everyday lives of everyday citizens. So that was our first experience, and it went really well, actually, but it was completely an in-house operation. Since then, we, as I said, we got new responsibilities because of this transparency regulation, and also additional money to do campaigns. So since 2021, we've done this now for 2 years. Last year it was in the summer, and in the first year it was kind of late spring, early summer, the timing. And the countries, we do this together with member states. It's really a comprehensive campaign where we're working with an agency in each member state, and they're liaising with the member state authority as well, so that we tailor the activities. There are all kinds of activities, meetings, you know, kind of open kiosks and restaurants and things like this getting involved, supermarkets getting involved in some countries. So it's really been very diverse. We called it EU Choose Safe Food. And for our objectives, we wanted to focus on the science behind food safety. We saw in the Eurobarometer that we did in 2019 that there was low awareness that science was behind food safety, and that there was a body, EFSA, who was kind of coordinating that scientific part. But we saw that there was high trust in scientists. So we wanted to you know, narrow this gap, get people more aware and moving more towards the high trust in scientists that we saw in the figures. As I mentioned, the transparency regulation brought in this new objectives for us, which were to try and promote more understanding and awareness of EU food safety. So we started these campaigns in 2021, and there you can see some of the national agencies who have been involved in this last year. Greece was involved in the second year, not the first year, but in the 2022 campaign, Greece has been involved and will be again next year in 2023, along with more member states. So we've got more member states involved as well. And it's really interesting to see that it works differently in each country as well. So, you know, depending on the fabric of communications in each country and the way the systems are set up as well, it varies. So some things work better in some countries than in others, and so it's quite a mixed thing, and we really see that flexibility works as well. It helps increase the impact. But just very quickly, 2022 we had a big focus on social media. We did in 2021 as well. So these campaigns were more social media focused, lots of paid social media advertising as well. In fact, that's where most of the budget has been consumed. But we also tried this year to do some more kind of innovative stuff like user-generated content. So we did one activity where we asked users to arrange the food in their fridge according to the best advice. So where you place the cooked food, the raw food, the meat, you know, there is advice about the best way to do that. So we asked people to do a video to show how they did their fridge, and actually we got something like 30 videos, those 30 submissions. It was quite interesting. And then we have all these quick bites or information about, different types of food, things to think about, the nutrition side of things, the safety side of things as well. We also did this Science Cooks video, which you see there in the bottom, where we had a contest to influencers who are chef influencers, so they kind of go on Instagram and they cook things, and they have big followings in their countries. I think one was from Portugal, one was from Finland, and then we had two scientists there as well, one from EFSA, one from a member state authority, and they had to pick the ingredients, and then the chefs had to come up with the dishes, and then they kind of judged which dishes have made best use of the ingredients, not just from taste and presentation, but also from the nutritional side as well. So that was something, as you can see there, it got 200,000 views. It's probably had a few more since then. So yeah, just some more examples. There's the fridge contest, as you can see. So very, very social media focused. What has been the impact of these things? Well, we've seen in the countries where the campaign focuses, and also the target population, because it's not the whole population. We're targeting certain age groups, 25 to 40-year-olds, mainly women, but also men, but primarily women. So the reasons why we selected that group was there are many factors that go into that, but I guess we wanted to, it's the first time we've done this kind of huge public information campaign, really covering all different aspects with member states. So I guess we wanted to go for what you could say is the low-hanging fruit. So maybe the audiences where you feel you've got most most potential to have a big impact. And we've seen there has been a big impact. So in the surveys that we've done, following the two campaigns, the awareness that science is behind food safety is really shot up hugely. And then we also did a new Eurobarometer in 2022, and we saw the same effect. So there's been an increase in the countries where the campaign has been really promoted. We call them the focus countries. The second part of the messages, actually, there was the thing about science behind food safety, but also we wanted to push the fact that people can be confident about their food choices. Food is safe in Europe. We've got the best standards, among the best standards in the world, so you really can be confident about your food. So those were the two big messages, and those messages really were having an impact from the follow-up research that we've done in the Eurobarometer. So that's it. Finally, I've finished. I'm sorry I've gone on forever. I hope you find it interesting. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions if you're still awake.
Thank you. We are all awake. Thank you.
I'll stop sharing.
I hear the applause. Thank you, Tony, for the very interesting presentation. You helped us understand the role of EFSA as well as your work in the authority. We can now move on to the discussion session. I think we have a few questions in the chat. Let's see.
Can I ask you something? It's personal. I have exercised about English, Spanish. In EFSA Rural, if there is an article about English Spanish, Eagle.
Can you write it down?
I'm sorry, I don't.
In order to understand in the chat.
Maybe I can look at answers in the chat. Dioxins. What are the actions? Checks. Okay, first, EFSA doesn't do checks, so we're not responsible for the control measures. The control measures are performed by member state authorities mainly, and the Commission too. So the institutions also have some role there. For example, there was an outbreak in southern Italy of a plant pathogen, Xylella fastidiosa, and there is the member states who are responsible carrying out the checks. So I'm sorry, I'm replying to Kalemis Konstantinos.
Yes.
Yes, Konstantinos. So the dioxin, yeah, as I said, so we did a scientific evaluation actually on dioxins following the Irish scandal in 2008, but we don't have any role on the checks. That's a member state competence. So of course we provide if they. Some of the types of things that need checking, for example, outbreaks, microbiological outbreaks. What we do is we have a role there, which is the trace back. We have to try and find the source of the outbreak. So there we work closely with member states to try and trace the source of outbreaks. And then once it's resolved, well, actually the primary responsibility is to the food producers and retailers who are distributing, if they're distributing contaminated products, then primarily it's their responsibility. But of course, then the member states need to make sure that the producers remove any contaminated products from the shelves. So that's how it works. Okay, I see another question there in the chat from Panagiotis about which one? Yes, sorry for my pronunciation of Greek names.
Don't worry.
Which one of the communication strategies EFSA coordinated would you describe as the most successful? Do you have any kind of impact assessment in different target groups? Do you have modified strategies for different types of audiences? Well, starting with the last part, I think you've seen that depending on the target audience, we're using different channels and tools. So yes, we don't do the same thing on the same issues for different audiences. You know, we do have a we adapt, you know, to the different circumstances. Do you have any kind of impact assessment? Yes. Well, as I mentioned, the most we do follow-up surveys. So that's the main tool that we can use. And then, of course, we have analytics as well. So we look at the impact of, well, visits to our website, but also mentions of EFSA in the news media. We do media analysis as well. So we look at all the stories where EFSA is mentioned and we analyze them and say if it's positive, negative, or neutral, or whatever. So all of that goes into the impact analysis that we do on the communications. And yeah, we're quite that's a big part of the work actually. And we actually have people who just do that. So which has been the most successful? Well, that's really hard to say, I think. Yeah, I really no. I really couldn't say because it's hard to judge.
The top three.
Well, I think I've chosen some of the most important ones. I think certainly the African swine fever, I think, has been a massive thing for us, where we really upped our game and did something, you know, that was really creative from a communications point of view, but also impactful for society and for the interested parties, you know, the farmers and, you know, and the member states, as I said, the chief veterinary offices. Other things that have had a big impact, I don't know, it's really hard for me to answer. Sorry. Sorry. Other questions, I'm looking now in the chat. Thank you.
Alexia Gelidi.
What is the biggest challenge that you've ever met at EFSA? Okay. The biggest challenge, probably glyphosate, this pesticide substance, I think, is, so not me personally, but EFSA as an organization, we really had to, we had to put in a massive amount of work to defend our work and to explain what we do. And to you know, deflect these allegations of conflicts of interest and doing bad science and all the rest of it. So I think that's probably been one of the biggest challenges we've had, but actually it had a positive outcome because it led to the transparency regulation together with some other things. But I have an exercise about eagle Spanish, a Spanish eagle. Is that that's an animal, you mean?
I think we don't have to answer this question.
Sorry, I don't know what it means.
It's irrelevant.
Okay.
Stamatia Guma.
So here you mentioned sometimes there's no point trying to convince people about certain facts since they have but you still have to share the information. Well, I think glyphosate is a good idea. We knew that certain of our audiences, certain NGOs, there are NGOs that are, it's a good example. There's certain NGOs that simply say pesticides should not be used at all. Yeah. So their whole existence is to ban pesticides, all of them. Now, I'm not saying you need pesticides, but pesticides do play a role. They kill pests, they kill insects, they kill fungi, they kill weeds, so that our crops grow and that we have enough food, in the EU. So the argument that you just have to get rid of them completely, and it doesn't matter what any of the benefits of pesticides are. There are some that have that very, very, a very extreme position. So we know that there's nothing that we can do to convince them that pesticides are a good thing. But what we can do is say, you've criticized our science about the evaluation of these pesticides, and that's not true, because these are the steps that we took, and this is the evidence that we looked at, and these are the other bodies that we worked with in order to do that. So this is the kind of a good example, I think. So a question regarding selection evaluation criteria, interface between science and citizens. How do you screen scientific studies? Okay, that's not really interface between science and citizens, how we screen studies. Do you mean the studies that are used in the scientific evaluations, or do you mean studies that we might use to understand consumer behavior? Because there's two different things. In our communications, we might use studies about consumer behavior. Do you have a list of experts in scientific journals? What do you do? Lots of questions in this one. What do you do where there does not exist a scientific consensus? Okay, so there's many questions here. Maybe not enough time to answer all of them completely. What happens when there's no scientific consensus? Well, we do have a specific procedure for that. It's called actually we refer to it as a scientific divergence. It hasn't happened that often since EFSA's existed, but there are about 20 cases of them, of scientific divergences. And what happens is we meet together with the other bodies and we produce a report outlining why the divergences exist. Usually it's because the assessments have a slightly different purpose. So, for example, the Chemicals Agency, they don't specifically assess risks for food use of chemicals. They might assess them more for worker exposure. Yeah, so if workers are exposed to chemical, then workers are at risk, and therefore the chemicals should be treated in a certain way. Whereas if it's in food in much tinier quantities and exposure is very, very low, then it's a different level of risk. So usually we have to explain that kind of context. What is the assessment really about? What is the problem that we're trying to address in the assessments? That differs. The scientific studies that we use, we do have protocols that we use in order to find studies, select them, appraise them, include them, exclude them from an assessment. It depends on the quality of the studies, the study design, whether or not it's relevant information for the specific aspect of the assessment that you're looking for. Also, we use in the market authorization assessments, we're obliged under EU law to use studies that are provided by industry, because basically the EU laws say that whoever intends to benefit from a product being on the market, then they have to finance the cost of the scientific studies that substantiate that. But it is feasible for us to then use studies that come from academia, for example, as well. We don't have to just use studies submitted by industry. Do you have a list of experts and scientific journals you consult? Yes, we use the bibliographic tools to access the journals. The experts we select, well, our panel members, they join following a process. They apply, so they basically apply to be panel members. They're screened, and then we select them based on the screening and the needs that we have. And then we get working group. We get other specialists to join our working groups and things as well, based on their research, their specialization. So, sorry, I'm trying to get through all these questions. Regarding the public, how do you go about translating very technical information to plain language? In doing so, don't you run the risk of simplifying the issue? Yes. Yes, the answer is yes. So how do you overcome this? Well, you employ people like me who have a journalistic background and are used to explaining things in simple language. You have to maintain accuracy. You can't change what your scientists have said. So sometimes it isn't 100% successful, but I think we've improved in the last 5 to 10 years. I think we write much more clearly now when we're trying to explain these topics. Okay.
I think this was the last questions.
Okay.
Once again, I would like to thank you and express my gratitude for your wonderful speech. And I would like to thank you all for your participation in this lecture. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye.